We are back on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk, 1180, 1230 KGEO, 1410 KERI, now in Albuquerque, New Mexico on 1000 KKIM, and also on the Internet in the San Francisco Bay Area on knookmedia.com. So, Clay, what do you think of Tom?
I think Tom's a sharp guy.
I like Tom a lot.
Yeah.
He's been a fun guest.
You know, I got to tell you a little story about Albuquerque.
Okay.
I've got a buddy, he and I went to elementary school in Connecticut. And he lives now in Virginia, just outside Washington. And he called me one day. He said, Clay, I'm going through Albuquerque, and I heard this voice that sounded just like you. I said, it wasn't.
That's funny. Well, you know, we had a show on, a couple months ago that was interesting to a friend of mine in British Columbia. Yeah. He was listening to the show in Albuquerque, which cracked me up.
Yeah.
So you've got British Columbia listening to a show in Albuquerque that broadcasts in Bakersfield. So
unbelievable, isn't it?
Isn't it a wild world?
What a great life.
Yeah, it really is.
Great world.
Yep. And we've got a friend of mine on that I haven't seen in a long time. If you go up Highway 99 here in California, you see his face plastered all over the place because he's a farmer, and his big issue, for some strange reason, is water and agriculture in California. I can't imagine why.
Well, agriculture, I understand, but why is he worried about water?
Gee, why would you be worried about water?
Isn't there plenty of it?
Yeah, a good friend of mine.
River's full right now.
Yeah, good friend of mine who we were on the same team together at college at University of Phoenix a few years ago. Steve Paul. Steve, welcome to Taking Care of Business.
Well, thank you for having me, Marty. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
It's been a long time.
You don't look any different at all.
Well, you do.
Well, yeah,
he does, doesn't he? About 50 pounds different.
Yeah.
I had a beard and a goatee and the whole bit. I look more like Kenny Rogers.
There you go. Great to be on the show.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So, it's crazy what's going on, and for you poor guys, as far as farmland. What's going on with the water? I mean, what from your point of view, from your perspective?
Well, from a farmer's perspective, this is the worst year in history.
And stay close to this thing.
Okay, it's the worst in history, and it's basically hard to farm without water. And you go back in history when the California Aqueduct was put in and the Frank-Kern Canal was put in. The government at that time actually did good things. They brought in water to a land that could actually produce something that creates jobs, creates revenue. And they set up this great system. And people from all over the world come and look at this system, how we move water around. And it's the best in the world. And they've taken that away from us. And they've done that over time. They've done that both on the state and federal levels with the different Endangered Species Act, with certain issues with the amount of flow of water. And I'm not a specialist on this, but I can just give you my perspective as a farmer and what I hear and what I see. And they've restricted us so much that we're pumping the underground out from underneath us. Mm-hmm. And that's the next step that they're going to do. They're going to start monitoring that. But, 150 years ago, Bakersfield was a big pond, basically what it was. And how many people actually live in California now? Do you know
what
that
is
number?
It, 32 million
30
or something
million?
like that? Or yeah.
And it would be nice to have this whole place as a lake bottom again and go back to nature. The problem is there's 30 million people in California, and how do we feed them? Mm-hmm. So we have this great system set up, and it seems like every year somebody takes more water. We need this water for this fish, this water for this shrimp. They basically have regulated the pumping in the Delta so much that we don't get the water. I think that 90% of the water in the Delta actually goes out to the ocean. Most people are not aware of that. Yeah. And so there's plenty of water in California, but they just don't store it properly because there's some endangered species, and we have to keep the reservoirs at a certain level. But I've never heard them do anything with Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. Could you imagine if they just shut the water off to San Francisco one day and said, well, sorry, we have an endangered species, and no water for San Francisco? I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah. Pretty soon there'll be no food for San Francisco if we don't get water.
Yeah, and so people say, well, the farmers are stealing our water. Well, where does the water go? It goes to grow food to feed the cities. So, essentially, it's their water to feed them. But we've lost the correlation. We are not in an agrarian society where people actually understand how food is produced. And if people could understand what it actually takes, you take from the snow melting in the mountains coming down through the channels to the farmers, to the field, to the processing plants, to marketing. I mean, people just go to Safeway and they think, oh, there's my almond milk.
Right.
Well, do they correlate that this water that we're not getting, now they're not going to have almond milk in the store? Do they understand that? No, I think most people couldn't even answer the question, where does almond milk come from? So there's a disconnect between food and water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy. We're having a conversation with Steve Paul, a local farmer here in the San Joaquin Valley. So, Steve, looking at this right now, you're using well water because you don't have water in the aqueduct, right?
That is correct.
And that's fairly limited. I mean, it's not an unlimited supply of well water.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of the wells are actually drying up because they drilled them, say, back in the 1950s or 60s. And I think the last chart I looked at on some of the ranches, in the last 10 years, the water table has dropped from 100 to 150 feet.
Wow. So, Steve, what is it that you grow?
Mainly almonds. We used to grow cotton and hay and tomatoes and carrots and so on, but right now it's mainly almonds.
Why'd you stop growing the other items?
You know, at that time, farming wasn't that good, and it just wasn't productive to grow them for us.
So all that property that you used to grow those products on, are you growing anything on that today?
Yeah, those are in permanent crops. The valley has changed to a lot of permanent crops: grapes, pistachios, almonds.
So that's what you grow, basically,
yes.
Grapes, pistachio, and almonds.
Yeah, basically I grow almonds.
Now, so is that because of the water for a lot of these people? Is it they're changing their crops to something that might be less needy of water?
It's pretty much the profitability of it. Cotton, this was years ago, potatoes were grown here, and then cotton was grown here, and they can grow cotton in China and different places a lot cheaper than we can here. So, for instance, almonds. This is the perfect climate for almonds, for pistachios, for grapes, and they've done a great job of marketing these products. So you have the soil and the climate, and I think 80% of the world's almonds are actually grown here in California. 80%, wow. So we can control the market. And that's another point. We actually export something to China. So you look at it from an economic standpoint and say, the water actually helps us on our trade deficit because we're actually producing something. What does this state actually produce anymore? So we're producing...
Legislators.
Yeah, we produce almonds and pistachios, and we send them over to China. We send them to Europe. We send them to India. I mean, that's a great thing. But I don't want to get into the politics side of it, but that's where the Democrats are controlling this state, and they don't look at the economic value of it. They think we can just get our food from Mexico or somewhere else.
Which is where we're getting it from.
You don't know this, and I know Marty does, but I'm also a farmer in some sense. I own a catfish farm up in Oakdale, California. We've got 13 ponds, and we buy our water from the Oakdale Irrigation District. And unfortunately, we're being restricted now on the water that we have, which means now we can't grow the black bass, we can't grow the trout, we can't grow the catfish, which is really going to cause us a lot of problems as well. So I understand what you're going through.
Yeah, and we're in a 3-year drought. That's what everybody says. But really, to the farmers, we're in a 5-year drought. And you'll say, well, what do you mean 5-year drought? Well, let me explain something. Back when we had some really good rains and snowpack, I think it was 2009, 2010, Judge Wagner, I think was his name, he stopped the pumping from the California aqueduct coming south. And we have a lot of irrigation districts that have these banking programs because we want to be conservative with our water and as efficient as possible so we don't lose it. So what they've done is they've collaborated to where they have these banking programs. But if you don't have the water coming from the delta, it doesn't work. So those are the years where we should have been banking the water and then using those on our crops. However, they shut the aqueduct off, so we were not able to bank the water, and then we had to pump it from the underground. And then today, the water levels are lower because we had to do that, and that most people don't realize that.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, excuse me. So here we are then. We've got the water table going down in the wells. What percentage of the normal water are you getting from the aqueduct?
0%.
0%? They're not giving you any water at all?
No, that's both federal and state. 0%.
One of the things when we come back I want to ask some questions on is I understand that some of the water districts are selling the water at a very high price to some different farmers, and I don't know if you're involved in that or not, but
okay, when we come back
I think
from the break,
we're coming back in a minute. So
okay, we come back from the break. We're visiting with Farmer Clay and Farmer Steve, and we'll talk about that when we come back. We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio News Talk 1180.